The first time it happened, I was praying. I had recently lost my grandmother, and I was feeling lost. I decided that I would turn to God to find peace and some answers, and come to terms with her death. The chapel I went to was the one that my grandmother used to take me. It was small and always very quiet. Not many people visited. I decided to go there to feel closer to her. As I walked in, I could see no one in which made me feel better. I really didn't want to lose it in front of other people. I sat down to enjoy the silence and started praying. Imagine my surprise when in the middle of my prayer, I heard this little voice whispering, "I hear you." I jumped up and looked around. I was clearly alone, and I could not locate the source of the voice. I decided that it was a figment of my imagination and continued to pray. 5 minutes later, though, the voice came stronger. "You shouldn't be doing that." It was right next to my ear. So close it made the hairs on my neck stand up and sent shivers down my spine. As I turned around, I came face to face with a girl, maybe 11 or 12. She was wearing this red dress and she was barefoot. Her hair was the darkest black I have ever seen, and her eyes the same. I started screaming, but at the same time I was mesmerized by her beauty. "Shh," she said, putting her hand on my mouth. "Do you want Father to hear us?" Her touch was soothing and not threatening in any way. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to fight back tears. "I am the devil," she said, "the first unwanted." I started trembling, fearing this was the end of me. She moved closer, and as if reading my mind, she said, "Don't worry, my child. I won't hurt you. I am not the one you should be afraid of. I have come to warn you as I have done with so many others." A sudden noise like whistling made her stop talking, and I could see fear in her eyes. I tried to locate the source of the sound, and by the time I turned around to face her, she was gone. Only her scent lingered, this lovely lavender scent. I stayed there not moving, trying to listen for what felt like hours. I was sure I was going crazy and convinced myself this was all due to grief and lack of sleep. But as I closed the door behind me to head to my car, I heard her whisper again, "Be careful." It had been a week since the incident, and I had almost forgotten about it. I could hear the occasional whisper and catch a glimpse of something red in the corner of my eye, but never something specific. Fate would have it. I had to go and pick up my mom from the bus station, and the only way there, yes, you guessed it, was past the road with the chapel. The drive was uneventful until I got to the crossing in front of the chapel. I was getting nervous remembering what had happened, so I turned the radio on louder and tried to find a relaxing song. And that's when it came. The smell. The freaking lavender smell. I looked up from the radio and there she was. She was standing in front of the car. She looked exactly as she had before, but different at the same time. Older, tired. I screamed and got out of the car. I started running in the field behind me. I was losing it. The tears came and I succumbed to my fate. I turned around to face her as I could feel she had followed me. "What do you want from me?" I screamed at her. She looked at me with that deep sadness in her eyes and came closer. "I want you to hear me out, child. I want to protect you. I am running out of time and you have to help me." I was lost for words, but somehow mastered the courage to reply. "Me? Help you? Aren't you supposed to be all-powerful and, evil? Aren't you the devil?" She came next to me and this time smiled. "My lovely child. Yes, I was powerful once, but evil never. As for the name, I kind of hate it. You can call me Lilith." Somewhere in the distance, whistling was heard. I tried to speak, but she cut me off. "Child, you have to understand that what you know is all wrong. The world is in danger. You have been taught so many lies. You have been deceived. I am not the one you should be afraid of. I am not the one that is going to hurt you. I was God once." Hearing that, I started laughing. I laughed and laughed because I was sure I was crazy. This could not be happening. This thing in front of me, Lilith, was claiming to be God. She grabbed my hand and my laugh was cut short. "Child, you have to understand," she said. "I don't have much time. Can't you see I am different? I am getting older, dying even. He found a way to make it happen, and if I am gone, there is no one to save you. See through the lies, believe me." The whistling was heard again, closer. She squeezed my hand with profound urgency and pleading eyes. Whatever made me say the next words changed my life forever. Okay, let's say I start to believe you. How can I help? What is happening? The wind picked up suddenly, and I saw her shivering. Not here, she said. I will explain tonight. In the chapel. Tell no one where you are going. Don't even think about it in your mind. He is everywhere. And with that, she disappeared. I was left alone once again, thinking that I was insane, imagining things. The red mark on my hand from where she held me, though, was there to prove me wrong. I suddenly remembered about my mom and checked the time. I was surprised to see that no time had passed, and somehow I was standing right next to my car. I decided to do what I was told, and not to dwell on it in my head. I don't know who he was, but I was suddenly afraid. The rest of the drive was uneventful, and I have to admit that seeing my mom made me feel better. Upon returning home, we sat down and had dinner together, happily chatting away and reminiscing about the last time she came to visit. Suddenly, she stood up and proceeded to say she had a gift for me. She ran out to the car and brought in this little packet and gave it to me. I hope you like it, my dear. It's a new perfume. Try it, she said. I thanked her and proceeded to open it. I took the cap off to smell it and froze. It was lavender. I tried my best to hide my horror from my mother and casually asked her why she chose to buy me this specific one. In retrospective, I wish I never asked, because her answer chilled me to the core. She explained that she was in the shop struggling to buy me a present when a girl approached her. A girl roughly my age, with a lovely red dress. Her hair was the darkest black, and so were her eyes. My mom said she was instantly drawn to the girl and they started chatting. The girl was really interested to hear that my mother had a daughter and asked all sorts of questions about me. She said the girl suggested the perfume because it was her favorite. My mother said the girl seemed sure that I would love it, as lavender has such a soothing and familiar scent. I wish I could tell her how wrong she was. With this discovery in my mind, I decided I couldn't hear any more, so I found an excuse to cut the conversation short and put a film on. A couple of hours later, I said goodnight to my mom and headed up to my room. The time was almost midnight. I made sure my mom went to bed, waited a bit until she fell asleep, and got ready to make my way to the chapel. I was terrified but determined to find out what was going on. As I arrived, a priest was inside. I explained my story, and he began to pray with me, casting out any evil that I had encountered. I never heard or saw the devil again. "Okay, Lilith," I whispered as I got in my car. "You have my attention." My father is not the type of man to seek attention. He's a humble, honest, hardworking man. And as a result, I wholeheartedly believe him. Since he could remember, he had the misfortune of being more sensitive to the paranormal than most. What I mean by this is that all throughout his life, he has found himself face to face with most of the stories we're warned about. Even now, as a grown man, our entire family has grown accustomed to experiencing more than our fair share. It's almost as if this sort of stuff follows not only him around, but us too. This particular story takes place in Mexico, when he was maybe 8 or 9. He was accompanying his grandfather, who at the time worked as a watchman at one of his friend's stores. This specific store also functioned as a warehouse, similar to stores like Costco or Sam's Club, but on a much smaller scale. It was around 11 o'clock when they arrived, well past sunset and into the night. My great-grandfather and his friend had struck a deal, and whenever he was on his shifts, he could help himself to anything he wanted to eat as long as he kept a list in order to make sure it wasn't marked down as stolen inventory. As they were getting ready for the night, my dad was told that he could choose anything he wanted to eat. My dad was excited to hear this, as it wasn't often that he was given the opportunity to choose anything from the store that wasn't a necessity without having to worry about having enough to pay for it. He wanted to make sure he made the most of this opportunity and decided to go around the store looking for what he wanted the most. He finally made up his mind and settled on a bottle of chocolate milk. He started to make his way around the store and eventually found himself wandering the halls in search of the refrigerator aisle. After figuring out it was in the very back of the store, he hurriedly rushed towards the low, buzzing hum of the dozens of refrigerators. After running past the aisles and suddenly turning onto the very last aisle, all he remembers was, an indescribable feeling of not only pure terror and true fear, but also an endless sense of despair. As he turned the corner, he was face to face with a tall, thin man with red eyes. My father tells me this man had to have been at least 2 meters tall. His initial reaction was to try and run away from him, but he couldn't. It was more than being just paralyzed with fear. He felt an endless empty pit inside him as well as around him. He doesn't remember the face of that man, and he doesn't know how much time passed. He had lost his sense of where he was, and at the time could not for the life of him tell anything, except for the fact that it was him and the man in front of him. He does remember, however, that this man was neatly groomed and seemed very well kept. Despite not remembering his face, he does recall that he was staring straight at him with those glowing red eyes. He does not remember what happened after. He only remembers coming to his senses on the floor in his grandfather's arms, being questioned about what had happened. His face was full of tears. All he could manage to choke out was that the man was there, over and over. His grandfather's first thought was that someone had broken in, and he rushed my father back to the front of the store where the only lockable room was located, the owner's office. He told my father to wait inside the office, and that no matter what to not open the door for anyone. He would be back as soon as he checked the store to make sure it was safe, but the memory of the man was still all too fresh in my father's mind, and he decided he'd rather brave running into the man again with his grandfather by his side, rather than remain alone inside the store again. Despite his grandfather believing it wasn't safe, he could see the terror in my father's eyes and complied with my father's wish. After checking through each and every corridor and deciding that the store was safe, they both headed back to the office, where my dad explained everything. For the most part, it seemed to be an isolated incident, as my great-grandfather later that morning told the owner what had happened, and he claimed it was the first he had heard of anything of the sort happening inside the store. It is worth noting, however, that the store was torn down not 2 months later after this incident, and the owner seemed to give no more of an explanation other than he was losing money. Despite my dad not daring to outright say what he thinks he saw that night, it's more than apparent to me that based on his description of both the man and the feelings that overcame him, I think it's safe to assume that the man he saw was none other than the devil. The demolition of the store does nothing but further fuel the theory as to what it was my father saw that night.